The government may shelve 2 trillion rupee freight corridor plan, read a recent news report. It went on to add the government is likely to abandon the plan to set up three more dedicated freight corridors, or DFC as they are popularly called, the East Coast, the East West, and the North South corridors, which was estimated to be a combined cost of around 2 trillion rupees. What ails Indian Railways and its plans? In India, the freight segment of the Indian Railways is profitable, while the passenger segment makes large losses. For every rupee spent on ferrying passengers, it suffers a loss of 55 paise. Should the Indian Railways stick to the Garib Rath and leave the Vande Bharat to the private operators? Around 70% of the Indian Railways revenue comes from freight traffic. The railways transported around 1,418 million tons of freight, and India will save around 1.3 lakh crore annually as diesel costs in 2031 if it successfully ferries 1,500 million ton additional cargo through trains. Yet the dedicated freight corridors aren't making the impact needed. A Niti Aayog study in 2022 revealed rail freight costs the least at 1.6 rupees per ton kilometer. In comparison, the waterways will cost around 2, roadways stood at around 3.6, and air freight topped the list highest at 18 rupees. Clearly, it makes the most sense for India to move more people and goods via the railways. Are the Indian railways too big and too bureaucratic to help India achieve its economic goals? Can we make this centuries old elephant, which does everything from making wheels to coaches to building tracks to running the trains and maintaining the IT systems for ticketing, can we make it dance? Sharif Qamar is engaged with the Transport and Urban Governance Division of the Energy and Resources Institute, called TERI popularly, as its Associate Director. A postgraduate in economics and a China-India visiting scholar fellow from the Ashoka University, he has worked on several projects related to public transportation, long distance and urban freight, EVs, emissions and efficiency improvement policies and transport modeling, research, policy analysis, and project implementation within the transport and the urban governance area. He has written many papers on urban freight and railways. He has a lot of knowledge in that space as well. So let's talk to Sharif today about uh, what is the reforms that we think railways should do in order for them to play a larger role in taking us to the two commitments that we have. One is the growth in economy to the 5 trillion and more. We want to become a bigger player in the global economic space. And we also have the net zero commitments that we have to reach out, right? So there are these two goals that we are trying to achieve, get our GDP up and things like that, get prosperity for the people. And that requires movement of goods and people, and also this whole net zero. These are two big things. Is railways prepared? I mean, they are doing what they are doing, but are they ready? What are the different things that are holding them back for an explosive growth? Because everything else is growing explosively. This linear growth trajectory in how the railways has been growing, is that good enough? What do you think they should do, Sharif?
Well, Sathya, first of all, thanks for inviting me for the discussion. And it's a very important topic to discuss while we are talking about transport and emission reduction in the transport sector. Railways, is staged to play a vital role in not only in development or economic growth of India, but as well as its contribution to emissions, and which have been listed and documented extensively by the government as well. If you pick up the growth part, railways right now contribute about 20 to 25%, depending on which report you're reading or referring to, of total freight share. It currently tackles about or caters to 9% of passenger traffic. So which, if you look at it economy-wide, it seems very small, and therefore we'll talk about the challenges later on. So it really is right now in freight sector. If we specify, 1,500 million tons was carried last year. It was a record freight carried by railways. The aim is to double it by 2030, by to 1,500 million ton again, which leads to about 3,000 million tons by 2030. That there are certain challenges. Again, we'll discuss it. The other aspect of emissions that you kind of covered in 2016, when the COP commitments, 2015, 2016 Paris Agreement was made, railways was one of the key levers from the transport sector, which was in the India's NDC, nationally determined contributions, and so it talks about 45%. Right now, we are anything between 20 to 25%. Depending on which data you have. So I think there's a huge challenge, but at the same time, railways is kind of geared to cater to those challenges. Some of the timelines may be missed; it could be extended. But if you look at the past 5 years growth of traffic, I'm not talking about passenger but freight, including the COVID period that we had between 2020 and 23. I think the freight segment did really well, remarkably well. So I mean, both from traffic and growth point of view, as well as the emissions point. Now, one point is to understand is railways is 4 times, less, or 4 times more efficient in terms of emissions if you compare it with road transport. If I go to the numbers, it's quite. It's 0.009 kgs of CO2 per ton kilometer. For a road, it would be 0.040 kgs per ton kilometer. So we have done the maths around it, and railways has kind of adopted these numbers under their rail green points, which are being given as if you take a bill, if you move a cargo from point A to B, what is the carbon savings you do by choosing railways is something that TERI and our team worked out. And railways, were very kind enough to adopt it in their system of billing as well. Later on, those numbers could be used for other carbon credit markets and all. But this is one way to create awareness among the stakeholders, the consigners and the people in general, about railways' contribution to emissions. And the other way is if you load more traffic. You touched upon 2030 as net zero target. That's really important to look at. And I have always been saying, for the past 4 or 5 years, when this term kind of got launched by railways or introduced by railways, it does not matter if you if you go net zero. But what matters really is what traffic you are carrying on that net zero plan. I think that's important to look at. The traffic should be higher as compared to what we are carrying right now, and we have competitions from the road sector to look at. But we need to work on that.
So why don't we pick that up? Like you said, 20 to 25% of the total freight traffic is by rail. What is the road and the air? That's inter-country. There's no ship there, right? I mean, we are only talking about inside the country. What do you think is an ideal? If they have to double this, what does that share go to? And how much of that comes off of the road? What do you think it should be ideally?
So again, one, general thing that is misconstrued is railways, road is not eating into railways traffic. The size of the cake itself is going, or the size of the pie is
increasing
high. It's up to railways to take that, share as much as possible. And historically as well, if it's very interesting, if you go back 300, 400 years back, or 200 years back, when kind of railways got launched, it's starting so-called eating into waterways traffic, because everything that time almost everything moved through waters. And it's very interesting to look at how the share of waterways went down and how the share of railways went down. So that's interesting. And similar thing kind of started happening after 1950s with railways and roadways. The share of railways at that time was 85%, which has come down to 20-25% right now. So I mean, competition is there. Road transport is an important part, and you see a lot of developments happening on the road front. 40, 50 kilometers of road being built per day. And that's quite remarkable. And this we expect to be going for some time because India is a developing country and we need that infrastructure. But at the same time, how do we increase the traffic onto railways is something very important. There are definitely beneficial economic aspect to transporting from railways as well. We talk about pricing. I think that's important to look at. But if you look at overall, A to B kind of transportation, including the railways network, the costing becomes unviable for most of the traffic. The other aspect, if you look at the passenger side, and we do complain about being subsidized for passengers and cross subsidization of freight. You are charging more for freight and you are subsidizing for passenger traffic. I think that's important to look at because railways has a real social service obligation attached to it. It has to run trains where it is economically unviable. It is strategically important to operate trains to the far off regions as well. So all those factors kind of builds into how railways kind of operate, and no matter what, there is also an angle of public good or public transport, or quasi public transport for railways vis-a-vis other modes of transport as well. So there are social obligations attached to it. From the passenger side, you can't do away with that aspect. And you are in Bangalore and I'm in Delhi. I know, from Delhi to Lucknow or from Bangalore to Chennai, people right now prefer driving. Why is that? So why can't we have at least medium distance or medium haul distances covered by railways? And railways has kind of done a remarkable job by introducing Vande Bharat trains, which are high speed trains, catering to, you have all the conveniences that you could think of, and then also catering to a class which is more susceptible to shift to road. You can take out your SUV and drive to Chennai, or I can take out my car and drive to Lucknow. But how do we then change the entire experience of transportation by or through railways? Is something that we need to do.
Yeah, railways is currently unattractive. I'll come to the passenger part. You said something interesting about this not, I'm not assuming it to be a zero-sum game, but at some point, this is going to eat into some amount of road traffic. Not that it is bad thing because, like you said, it's 4 times more efficient. The cost of transporting by railways is cheaper. It is 4 times more efficient in terms of emissions. Naturally, we should have an incentive to increase the more efficient, more economically friendly, and more distinct mode. You cannot say that I would like to stick to the more costly, more polluting mode just because I'm afraid of eating into that pie. The roadways have multiple purposes, just like the railways have multiple purposes. There is passenger, there is goods. There are two things that need to go around the country. It's about efficiency. In your experience, of looking at increasing the railways cargo footprint. I know you're saying they do a good job of it, but I don't see them. If we have to scale exponentially, what are the things that they can do on the freight side? And this, incidentally, for the people who are watching, is like you said, 70% is what I saw the last time of railways revenue comes from freight, right? And they're using that to cross subsidize. Now let's stick to the cargo for a little bit, and I want to come to the passenger and their obligations there. At some point, I see that they are going to have to compete very, very niche segments and have very niche ways of working on the passenger segment and still fulfill their social obligations. But why don't I see a lot more private players in the railway space for the cargo side? In their act, it very clearly allows private people to come in and offer more services for cargo. They can lease their tracks, make more money out of it, and still scale. Is it really hard to work with the railways? Because I find them very hard. They're a huge monolith, and they seem to have a big thing on their shoulders and on their head saying that, oh, we know everything. We've been running this for 200 years. So nobody can do anything else. This is the way we work. Can they not reform themselves a little bit to actually aggressively take on more because they are more efficient and because they can actually save us so much more carbon or emissions rather?
Satya, very interesting points that you raised during your kind of asking the questions or framing the question. I'll go step, point wise, and I'll try to go point wise. One is the costing part that you mentioned, and that report will also be, you mentioned about 1.5 rupees and 2.2 rupees for road transport. That report would also mention about in a line that these costs are for haulage charges, which means only on A to B, not the entire O to D.
Sure.
Or origin to destination.
Fair enough.
So the haulage charges definitely is something that railways is very efficient in terms of other modes, any mode of transport, like I said. But please understand, the cargo that is being moved is not moved on A to B, but O to D.
Yes.
Origin to destination.
There is a last mile.
The last mile issue is a major one. And we did multiple commodity specific, studies in TERI. And we also looked into automobile sector, which is a booming sector for railways to cater.
Yes.
Right. So earlier, when we started working on it, some 7 years back, 2016, and towards 2020 or 2021, the share kind of leapfrog for four-wheelers cargo. Four-wheelers as cargo for railways. Very interesting fact was that railways did not increase the tariff rate on automobile. And the other challenge that we looked into was that your haulage charges is fine, but your manufacturing to terminal related charges, and then where the cargo is offloaded, that terminal charges and how it is being moved to the distributors or the warehouses or stockyards is something the cost kinds of adds into the road cost. I mean, it sometimes becomes more than road cost. That is one challenge. The second is the time that it takes to move that cargo vis-a-vis road transport. I think both these factors kind of played a pivotal role, and railways work dedicatedly, at least for this particular cargo. And therefore, you see a huge jump in their share of traffic for four-wheelers. So that's important to look at when talking about charges or the haulage costs for railways. And that needs to be worked out for all other companies. You need to have timetabled trains for majority of the private sector or no private sector. I think railways need to work on that.
And offer,
how do you do that?
And offer O to D as well, because the last mile now with innovative ways of getting, if you study where you did in the existing scenario, yes, it doesn't make sense. And for what distances also does matter, right? I mean, the last mile on both ends. Why can't railways look at OD and not just say, I am train and I'm only train? It could be with the interconnects with last mile operators, making that. I don't know, you're the expert here, but isn't there an improvisation that they can do to offer OD?
Yeah, I talked about automobile, segment as one of the cargo that comes under balance other goods. The railways people call it, BOG, and the vision document also talks about BOG as a major component in traffic basket. To kind of cater to meet that 3,000 million ton of target. The other side of the spectrum is coal transport.
Yes.
Automobile is a very small cargo if you look at the overall gross tonnage kind of carrier. Right now coal is the bread and butter for railways, right? It caters to about 45-46% of total traffic is coal transport in freight. So if they are carrying 1,000 million ton, 460 million ton is coal.
Mm-hmm.
How do they operate that? And I'm just trying to link it to the point that you mentioned about O to D.
Mm.
Railways, in most cases, if you look at where the coal is originating, they have a railway siding there.
Mm.
So the loading becomes, very easy and convenient and efficient in terms of, the loading aspect. So the first mile is kind of covered that. Now, if you look at the end, the destination point, the D point, you have these sidings there at the thermal power plants. So really, the train or the rake, called in freight parlance, the rake goes into the thermal power plant, and the box wagons, the wagons that are being used, they have openings that can discharge coal at the stocking or the stockyard there to be used by thermal power plants on a. It's called, I'm forgetting the name, but it's basically a conveyor belt that is there, and then that moves into that and into the plant. So your first mile and last mile is not an issue, at least for the coal. So that's a big chunk of your traffic needs to be. Now, between automobile and coal, I think a lot needs to be done from the point of view of last mile traffic and how to reduce those costs. Whether railways can, service the last mile themselves. They talk to the consigners and say, we will take care of your consignment from your manufacturing plant to the distributors or warehouses, wholesalers. So I think that aspect is coming into picture. Railways is working, on this particular topic, as I'm aware of. Although a lot needs to be covered as to where the industry, private sector is, leave alone if you talk about other countries like US or China. So we are graduating towards that. And I don't feel, one of the points that you mentioned is about the private sector's contribution. I think contribution from the rolling stock, which is the wagons and the goods being carried on the wagons, I think that is being done already. So I talked about automobile sector. There are multiple players who have put in their rakes or trains to service automobile or move automobile from, say, Manesar to Bangalore or Chennai or Guwahati. They're already doing it. So some of the big names in the industry they own rakes in the railways. They are already doing it. There are, of course, challenges. They're working with the railways on that. And then you talked about monolith. Of course, that's something, a legacy thing that is there. And it's very tough at sometimes for even a retired railway personnel to talk to. So leave alone us as researchers and think tanks to work on. But having said that, I think we have been very lucky from the point of view of doing research and contributing to railway sector. The support that railways has given is enormous in terms of at least listening to us as to what we kind of bring to the table while talking to multiple stakeholders, including the private operators and the consigners or the manufacturers of goods, including cement, steel, fly ash, containers, and other point that I'm taking from your question that you framed is multimodality of how do we then move into a phase where your last mile and main haulages are efficient
and integrated in some way, and you either financially own it or not necessarily asset wise. I'll come back to the asset piece, but how do you think that can work?
But if you look at other countries, the developed countries particularly, and how flexible they are in terms of moving cargo. One aspect is, of course, tariff rate. We'll come to it later on. But multimodality is primarily because of the ease of handling that cargo at the terminal or moving from one mode to another. And that's multimodal. If you look at the share of domestic containers that railways cater to, in overall containers, it's 20%. So 80% of containers being carried are EXIM containers.
Fair enough.
Where you have to pick it up from, say, Tughlakabad or some, ICDs, container depots to a port, right? So you have land ports and you have the sea ports there. So handling of these containers, the EXIM containers is very easy, or containers per se is very easy, because you have the forklifts, you lift it, put it on a truck, move it to the last part. That is not really happening in Indian context. And a lot of things kind of then gets into it. It's how the trucks are designed in India. You have the chassis separately, the body being built separately. It's not very convenient to move containers right now. The entire ecosystem now needs to adopt or adapt itself to cater to container, and that would really push domestic container traffic towards more efficient logistics. Yeah.
But broadly, I have a problem with trying to make this elephant dance. Right? Why is the railway still making coach wagons? Why isn't Ashok Leyland building, for example, or the Tatas building wagons for them? Why aren't they being included or invited into building this Vande Bharat? So why isn't that happening within the railways? Why is that organization alone different, holding on to 200-year history?
Yeah, I think a lot to do. I mean, I can't answer on behalf of railways.
No, of course you can't, but we can talk. You and I are just that citizens who can brainstorm at least and think about it.
And sometimes to us, as common citizens, it becomes very frustrating as well. I'm totally on what you are saying. But I think there is a urgent need to relook at some of the policies, at least for the infrastructure development. A lot is happening on the terminal operation side, but maybe on the rolling stock side is something that we need to look into and fast track as much as possible, and introduce newer technologies through international participation, like we have done for locomotives. In the rolling, so locomotives right now is being built by Siemens and one other player as well, which are high capacity diesel locomotives and so in the past 10 years, we see those international collaborations really fructifying and delivering to railways. So these are, good high capacity engines that we have now on tracks. Similarly, I think wagon is something that we need to look at. Terminals is something that railways has been proactively working on. There are bids and that have been awarded for private, operation of terminals and sidings, which are owned and operated by private, not perhaps owned because it's a lease that they get. So I think, you will see at least in the next 4 to 5 years as to what is happening. And there is a major shift. You have major players who are there in logistics who have good, efficient terminals and sidings being operated, at this point itself. So that is one aspect. So Gati Shakti cargo terminal policy, GCT policy, is something that is working towards that. And we were happy to kind of provide certain inputs and talk to some of the major players in the industry to look at the challenges and rectify and modify them. Because right now, a lot of decisions that are happening, and that is something that we spoke to railways as well. And they, some agree because it is there. Right. So a lot of decisions is centralized in nature.
That is a problem.
If a terminal has to be operated, say in a far off, in a certain, any changes that needs to be done in that terminal to make it more efficient, that paper moves, the request moves to the central
board,
and
the railway board.
The entire time duration that goes into it, it's quite frustrating to the person. And by the time the approval is there, the person who moved that paper is retired or moved on to some other country. So those challenges do exist. So GCT is something that really is throwing that thrust of fast tracking and introducing private efficiencies into terminal operations. Similar approach may be taken up in other segments of how railway operates and where railway operates, something that we can.
So the five wise men and the railway board is something that kind of controls everything. But again, like we'll move to the passenger side because there's a huge amount of things there. You said 9% of passenger traffic. That's very low, right? I mean, the amount of trains that are running, for every rupee spent on ferrying passengers, it suffers a loss of 55 paise, right, on passengers. How do you reconcile this? Isn't railways wasting a lot of time and effort trying to do this? And at the end of it is also fighting at the local level to run suburban trains, carry more passengers. Why? You're losing money. Why do you want to do so much? Stick to social responsibilities which are funded. Run your Garib Raths and take that funding and keep it to that, and then move more cargo. And even if you do, like you said, the Vande Bharats are competing against air traffic, right? If you should be putting short haul flights out of business, Bangalore to Chennai, Bangalore to Hyderabad, Mumbai to Ahmedabad, these kind of Delhi to Lucknow. There's a lot of the short haul traffic that can be cut off. And that's where they should be competing. So is there a problem with priorities in railways? Do they even know where they want to put their money on? Do you think they should be just sticking to the social stuff and then moving more and more out of passenger into attracting, lease the track out? Buy time every hour, give me this money and you just take and do whatever you want to run.
But Satya, I think some of the points that you mentioned, of course, Railways is aware of what it is doing. It's not,
of course, yeah.
Working in a dark room. Talking about the passenger and the subsidization of passenger transport, I think it is essential, at least for the country like India, where you have a lot of people who cannot afford even a railway ticket, let alone a bus or a car purchase. I think social obligation and the responsibility is huge, and railways should in no way kind of, at least personally as well as from the organization's point of view, we do not recommend, or it should not be recommended that it should move out of passenger traffic at all. That's unthinkable. And then you will have a scenario of US, if what is happening in US.
Yeah, everybody moves to the road.
You don't have passenger traffic in US at all. They are trying really hard to regain or at least retain what they have right now. India is kind of blessed to have that much of traffic. I was just reading the numbers. It was mind-boggling. 1920, just before COVID, it catered to 8 billion passengers, which is entire population of the planet in that 1 year. It kind of transported. COVID struck. A lot of passenger trains kind of were pulled out. And still to be reintroduced. And we see that about 40-50% of that traffic is now there only. We still lag on. So I think a lot of efforts need to be put in to regain that traffic. How do we get that? And if you look at the numbers, if the short haul that were there, that has also moved out of railway. They have moved out to either two-wheelers or four-wheelers or buses. But that is important for economy as well as environment. We discussed about those points earlier. From the point of view of aviation that you mentioned, I think we, of course, short haul and medium haul, which is less than 800 kilometers, internationally, but in India, it could be less than 500 kilometers as well. It depends on where which geography you're living in. I think it's important to touch upon that. And trains like Vande Bharat is specifically designed to take over that air traffic as well. But of course, from the convenience you'll have from a market perspective, you need to offer or at least give the service to a whole set of people, right? So you definitely need air traffic as well. But you also need in a big way road and railways as well. So those are the points that I think it's important to understand.
No, fair enough. I think I had a personal anecdote. Is a couple of people from outside the country wanted to take a train to Chennai from Bangalore. They either had to leave very early or they had to leave in the middle of the afternoon, which either spoiled the whole day or they were too early for everything. I think there is a need for more frequency, which means they might need to lose more money, or there is the whole... I completely agree with you, is that we can't keep taking away everything from the lower section of the economy, which actually relies on this for long distance commute. I personally also take a lot of the train because sometimes for the short haul, it is just not affordable and it's far more polluting to take a flight to somewhere nearby. But the interesting part I was getting to is that there wasn't enough frequency on the passenger side to be able to match what an airline offers like a slew of flights in the morning and a few staggered through the day and then a few more. There's a lot of effort. Do you think the railways do they have separate passenger and freight teams which look at it separately, and how are they structured to be able to make this improvisation? Of course, you can put the train, but tweaking that to try and compete with something else like the flight for short haul and medium haul and things like that. And on the cargo side, whatever you're saying, how much more distance is there in terms of reforming their executional capacities? On a scale of 1 to 10, are they at number 2? If they have to go all the way to 10, how far are they in having efficient structures, organizational structures? You talked about decentralization. I don't know how much of that is affecting that, because if everything goes and waits there, it's going to be a challenge. How much more reforms need to be done organization structurally in terms of how they think? Are they thinking like an organization which can deliver these services effectively?
Yeah, I think one is, of course, they are well equipped in terms of know-how as to operation of railways. Uh, it has been done for donkeys years as well. So they know how to operate railways. We are not there to teach or make them understand, how to operate. They do know it really well, and they have the international perspective as well.
Mm.
There are a lot of international travels and exposures that are being given to the railway officers, who understands the system, how it works, and how it will not work in it as well. So all these perspectives are there in place. Railways. It needs to be also understood as to how cities and suburban railways, if we talk about, Indian cities are also coming up with metro rails, right? And in Delhi, if you look at, or in Mumbai, that you look at, even in Hyderabad, Chennai, Bangalore, the suburban railways are there in these cities, the major ones. You also have the metros in place now, which costs a lot in terms of infrastructure building. Is there opportunity there to revamp and make the suburban rail more sexy? Yes, there is. Is there a need to revamp the infrastructure and build upon or give world-class facilities for last mile connectivities? Yes, definitely there is. Who will do it is pretty clear. Railways need to be doing it. No one else would come into that segment to operate. We saw, what happened in airport line in Delhi. It was earlier built by Reliance. They went out because the traffic not much, because the pricing was that high. Railways came in. Earlier the pricing was 105 rupees, 100 rupees per ticket journey. It was brought down 50% by DMRC, and it's working fine right now. And they have absorbed the losses there, but it is catering to a huge, more than 30,000, if I'm not wrong, people are traveling by airport line daily. That's a huge number to look at. So I think we need to understand that yes, there are challenges in place, which the railways are kind of aware of. They are working towards it. The pace we may not agree to it as common citizens who are really frustrated and at times very impatient. But I think it's important to understand that yes, it is a work in progress. We are not there yet in terms of efficiency and quality and experience, but we are not very far below in terms of these parameters as well. If you look at other countries, we are blessed with a system which is like 1 lakh track kilometers or 68,000 route kilometers. It's a vast network to look at. Yeah. And it's a huge system that is being 1.2 million people or 12 lakh people working in a system, and you have a hierarchy that it look into and how it operates. It's just mind-boggling as to just to try and understand how it operates. Let alone what needs to be done. It's a beautiful system in itself. If you look into the historical and the current aspect of operations, how they are managing it. No other system or transport system would have that kind of attachment or loyalty towards an organization that a railways has. I have people in my family as well who are railway people, and that's why I'm quite passionate about it. We do see, the loyalty that comes with a railway employment that is there. People who are working for it, and not now, but historically as well. We saw it in a movie which was recently released on Bhopal gas tragedy, right? How people kind of made sure that trains are stopped at a junction just before Bhopal at that time, and without some of the signals working. So it's a mind-boggling system. I think there are challenges there, but I think we are in work in progress mode as always. Hopefully, with multiple other infrastructure projects like the dedicated freight corridor and some of the high-speed railway projects that are going, I think it will become more sexy and efficient in terms of transportation, both passenger as well as freight. Yeah.
Fair enough. I think we should admit that the railways have come a long way. They run some of the most complex systems in the world. Things like IRCTC has made our life so much easier. We never have to stand in the queues that we used to stand in 20 years ago, right? And it works like clockwork. It goes down barely any time. There are private booking systems which go down far more often than a IRCTC does, despite of it being run by the government. The kind of people they move from the lower income segment and a lot of us, we choose Shatabdi over many other flights for short haul and medium haul. So that's a testament to how far they have come. Like you said, as citizens, we'd like to get more efficiencies out of the system. We'd like to see them be more, what can I use the word corporatish, so that they can deliver more for us and they can be a lot more better. One of the best systems in the world can get even more better. And I'm just worried that the size and the way they think, and because of where they are situated inside the government and the way that has been coming over the past 200 years, it may not allow them to do certain things which they could benefit from. And those are reforms I think we can talk about separately. Last but not the least, the last mile. The DFCs are coming up. The ability of freight to be more competitive depends on last mile, like you said. It's not just the coal. That's quite ironic. The most efficient, environmental friendly mode carries the most environmentally unfriendly thing. But that is what it is. We need that energy for now. But beyond that, what are the things that you think the railways are doing in terms of last mile, or can do in terms of last mile? Because you worked on all kinds of transportation systems, both inside urban areas, inside industrial parks, things like that. How do you see that ecosystem of a lot of the urban electrification, all of those things coming up on the last mile cargo delivery services, EVs, all of those things are coming up. And then there's this train between these two decarbonization roadmaps that we have on the small intercity and on the intracity and then the intercity thing. What do you see the synergies between railways and those kind of players?
Yeah, so right now, pretty much that is happening. Railways is there to kind of make the main haul operations, carrying it on track, railway track. What happens beyond it is kind of overlooked or kind of ignored by railways right now. That all itself is an understanding there in railways. And if you look at the paper or the vision document that came out for 2030, it talks about, and I touched upon that, about balance other goods, which also includes your white goods and all kinds of high price or high value goods as well. Now, the movement of those goods would be very different as to handling coal. Right? So if your coal traffic is going down, and if you're planning to cater to balance other good, you need to streamline yourself as per the requirement of the industry, which would require a single window operation that would say, okay, you manufacture good, we'll take care of the logistics of it, and we will ensure a timely and quality delivery of those goods. That needs to be done at a fast track basis. Right now, what is happening in the parcels segment or freight aggregation policy or scheme that railways has, there are definite areas of improvement there, and people want that single window service. Everything is being taken care by railways or
Correct.
agencies deployed by railways.
Correct.
who would ensure your products are safe in safe custody, as well as delivered timely and at a cost which is cheaper. Fourth, the environment aspect will come automatic. But these are the key parameters that needs to be looked into and seen how competitively other segments have worked out. If you look at how Amazon and the Flipkarts and the have taken up and kind of envisioned in how we perceive logistics segment. You on a click of a button you can know where your parcels are, in what condition, when it which slot of time will it reach to your doorstep is something that if you scale it up to large cargo movement, I think that's what the industry is looking forward. Just last point from my side, and I'm an economist, and I just wanted to throw these concepts to the audience is about how, and trying to link it with the transport system that we have. How competitive it is vis-a-vis other modes of transport. Railways, if you're sticking to this particular topic of railways, it is a natural monopoly that we say. It is operating at a least cost, which is very unique. And no other private sector or set of private entities would be able to, really take that burden on their shoulders. No one. You won't be operating at an operating ratio, which is how much you spend to get that 100 rupees.
Correct.
Right now, railways is beyond 100 rupees in terms of they're spending beyond 100 rupees to get that 100. No other sector would work at. Optimally for a private sector, it has to be less than 70.
Of course.
Right. But railways will not and may not be willing to do it or give it up as well, because as we discussed, social obligations and the infrastructure that is required to build in, it has a long gestation period. DFC has been in works for past 20 years now almost. So I think no other private entity or banks would take that risk of getting into that certain operation. I think that is important, and the concept of public good is something that we need to cater to people who may not be economically well off in terms of affording that, and just to service those set of people is really important from the railways and the government perspective. That's important.
That's a good summary. Thank you for that. One more curious thing is there a sense in separating the laying of the tracks into an infrastructure entity? Like how the power sector split the discoms from the producer, from the transmission corporation and all those things. Because I see that the operations has its own cost structure. The infrastructure is infrastructure. It needs to be funded and they get revenue out of it, right? You can lease the tracks and earn from that. Because you own the tracks, you have the monopoly over the tracks and you can do that. And that's like running Marth building highways. But if the operating companies are slightly different, then they may optimize it separately. The cargo ops versus the passenger ops versus this. And then you clearly know the split of how these things happen. Is that complicating things further, or is that something that will make them more efficient?
So there are experience from around the world that has gone from public entity to a private entity in terms of railways operation. If you look into the UK system of railways, they also kind of burn their, I won't say fingers, but hands into while going for. And there were a lot of issues from labor unions to trains not reaching on time and all other issues that happened because of the ownership pattern that they have. They have now so that's there in our front, in front of us to look at as an experience to gain. However, in Indian condition, we do not see that happening, in some time. At least something drastic happens or entire change in concept. But
you don't even see
it is right now. Yeah, it's fine. I think.
I'm not saying it's not fine. Is there there is a difference between complete net cost giving out versus the GCC kind of model, where if you look at the Stockholm Metro or Hong Kong or anybody, MTR, Veolia, all these people bid for a GCC kind of a model. right? $8 million, 8-year contract, or 8 billion, or whatever it is, and then performance-based parameters, route-based provision of some things, just for a few routes which seems to make sense, and especially like the Vande Bharat routes, which are at the premium level. You can still be running the Garib Raths for yourself. But more importantly, before we get into the rolling stock itself being differently organized and monetized, just splitting the infrastructure as an organization from the rolling stock operator as an organization itself does a lot of things. It starts, of course, it does bring the complexity, but it does say that it's not the same organization building the track and running the train as well. It doesn't even make sense, because people have done. Why are they doing that in the power production segment? The discoms are separate from the transmission company, is separate from the producing company, and then there is the PPAs that happen between them. You can run on contracts, right? At least it gives one level of segmentation. Is that hard I know you're saying it's hard to do on a monolith, but when do we start any? Is that even making sense? Is the question that needs to be answered. If it isn't, what is good is good. I mean, what is there is good. But if it is, I'm not saying you and I need to go and get that done, but it's a conversation that can set somebody thinking on those lines. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, it's interesting topic altogether to look into it. And I'm just talking about the experiences in the world that we have done.
True.
So you do see some bit of this concept of segregating and hiving off those segments to some efficient players in the terminal policy and the terminal, how terminals are being operated in railways, which are part of railways, but still it is given to private sector. And if I'm not wrong, the lease period has been increased to 35 years in some cases. So I think the visibility and the long vision is there from the private sectors to build or get into such high cost infrastructure projects as well. I think that needs to be really is the way forward. I see in terms of overall improving the efficiency.
And the nice thing with those kind of things is it gives them a confidence and momentum to go forward. If it works, if it doesn't, they'll have to pull back. So I think it's a learning process over the next 10 years. If they continue this momentum of giving out small things and getting used to it, maybe they will do more of that. And then there will come a time in the next couple of decades to do the split and reform them. A 200-year organization cannot be changed in 2 years. It probably needs at least 20 years, but I think it's a good conversation, and the efforts you guys have been doing are amazing. I will put links to your reports and in the show notes so people can read more, and if there are more questions, I'd like to have you back on the show and talk about a few more things around transportation and other things. But thanks a bunch, Sharif, for coming on the show and talking to us about these things.
It was an absolute pleasure, Sathya. Thanks for the opportunity.